Ladies and gentlemen, why are you a Christian? Some of you who are Christians have tragically buried your own children. Some of you have been victims of abuse. Some of you have been victims of divorce. Some of you have seen your jobs vanish, your money go away, your fortune reduced to nothing. Some of you have heard the dreaded word cancer. Some of you have experienced addictions, pornography, sex addictions, alcohol addictions, drug addictions. Some of you have children that are in the middle of drug addictions right now. And you've prayed that God would take this evil period, this evil event, this evil condition away. And in every instance, he has said no. Is it possible that the God that you pray to actually doesn't exist? I mean, if he did exist, why would he allow you to go through all of these difficulties? Especially when you pray for a child. You're in a church and the child gets sick. The pastor says, let's pray. Everybody pray. You pray for months for this child to be healed and the child dies anyway. Where was God? Why would you think God exists when such evil occurs? Especially, you claim to be a Christian, you're following God, and you have all this evil, all this suffering, all this persecution following you around. Meanwhile, you look across the street and your neighbor who's not a Christian and maybe a cheat, he's doing just fine. So is it possible the God you pray to doesn't really exist? And by the way, if this God did exist, I mean, the so-called God of the Bible, why would you worship him? I mean, Richard Dawkins, the great atheist who wrote the book, The God Delusion, back in, I think, 2006, had a pretty good point when he wrote in The God Delusion this: the God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction, jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully. And those are his good qualities. I mean, you just take a cursory read through the Old Testament. Go to Joshua, go to Deuteronomy. God wants to wipe everybody out, the women, the children, everybody. Seems like genocide. I mean, how do you disagree with what Dawkins just said here? Seems like he's right. So even if this God did exist, why would you worship him? Why? I mean, that's what a lot of progressive Christians are saying, right? They're saying that the God that you think is true, the God of evangelical Christianity, is a bully. Obviously, all the stuff in the Old Testament we just made. What about slavery, too? It's slavery in the Old Testament. What about that? Why? Why would you believe? And why would you believe a God? People want to love one another. Okay, so they're same-sex attracted, and God says no. Why? What's the point? How is that loving? And he has to have his son go die a brutal death? Isn't this kind of cosmic child abuse? Why can't he just forgive us if he's an all-forgiving God? He doesn't have to kill somebody else to forgive us. Do you have to kill somebody else to forgive them? Why does God do that? It seems like, you're living in a cult. You've got these toxic beliefs. You're not living your authentic self. You're trying to just adhere to whatever an ancient book written by people who herded goats actually wrote down 2,000 years ago. Why would you believe such a thing? Why? Well, ladies and gentlemen, what if your best arguments to doubt God show that he actually existed? What if your best arguments to doubt God show that he actually existed? Because that's my thesis, actually. Everything that, I left one thing, I left another thing out. Science will show you how to fly planes, but religion will show you how to fly planes into a building. What about science? Yeah. You don't need religion for that. So, what if your best arguments to doubt God show that he actually existed? That's my thesis, actually, despite that cheery opening. Because I think when atheists make some of the claims that I just made, they're actually stealing from God to argue against him. That's what they're doing. And I think you can show that quite clearly. And that's what we're going to talk about tonight. And that's what we're going to talk about for about 10 weeks, beginning on August 14th, because we have an online course called Stealing from God, Why Atheists Need God to Make Their Case. And in order to help us talk about this and to take your questions tonight live, I'm going to bring my colleague in, the great Jorge Gill. He's going to start off the conversation, and then he's going to feed some questions that you're going to, if you want to ask, you can ask on YouTube or Facebook, our YouTube channel, the Cross-Examined YouTube channel, Cross-Examined, and just put in big block letters in the front of your comment question, and we'll try and get it. So Jorge, come on in. Tell us, start us off, man. Start us off with some comments or some questions, and we'll get into this.
All right, Frank. Well, it's good to see you. I do want to tell everybody on the other side of the screen, it's been a while since I've been here at the live stream on Cross-Examining. We want to make sure that let everybody know that we are taking your questions on the chat section. We have a complete team that is going to be picking up the the best questions. Now, one thing I want you guys to do is to make sure when you're typing the question on the comment section, make sure that you put the word question in all caps so our team can recognize it and input it on for me and Frank to reply. Also, we're going to try to do more live streams. We have a great team of speakers. We have Phoenix Hayes. We have John Ferrer. We have a ton of friends in the apologetics communities that are willing to come and join us on the live streams here. So let us know in the comments section if you want more live streams here on the Cross-Examine channel, YouTube channel, and obviously Frank Turek and Cross-Examine Facebook page and Instagram. We're going to be using a lot of the Instagram and TikTok that Frank's content be going out on. So now I do want to ask you a few questions regarding these crimes that are committed against God, because when you wrote your book Stealing from God, the focus was initially atheists. It's very interesting that Richard Dawkins now is back on the scene, but for a very different reason, and we can talk about that in a little while. But right now, remember that, you know, when you first wrote that book, you focus on how atheists rely on concepts such as reason, morality, causality, etc., to argue against God's existence. But now there are other groups that are bringing the same kind of arguments in recent years and are using the same kind of thought and logic and idea to argue against things like the immorality of the God of the Bible, right. How unreasonable it is to believe in a God that will sacrifice his own son, very similar to the things you said earlier. So in the course of your work, you walk your way through the acronym in crimes. Now, we're going to start with these new groups that are using the same kind of arguments to argue against God while at the same time sitting on God's lap to do it. So tell me a little bit, and I know we were just in New Mexico, and this was a heated conversation that you had with a couple of ladies that is on our podcast. But tell us a little bit about how these new groups are doing the same thing the atheists were doing, let's say, 10 years ago when the new atheism was on the rise.
Right. The new progressive Christians, who in my view are not Christians nor progressive because they disagree with Jesus. So if you disagree with Jesus, you're not progressing, you're regressing. And of course, if you disagree with Jesus, you're not a Christian. But in any event, now they are talking about the fact that the God of the Bible is evil. And my point is that there's no such thing as evil unless there's good, and there's no such thing as good unless God exists in an objective way. And so if they're going to say that the God of the Bible is not the true God, that they have another God that is the true God, and that God is the moral standard, then they have to give evidence for that being. They just can't assume that being exists. And the problem is when you look at the evidence for Christianity, I think if you're reasonable about it and open to it, I think there's a very good case to be made that the true God is the God of the Bible. And if that is the true God, then he is the standard of righteousness. And he has certain reasons for doing certain things in the Old Testament that we might go, well, God, why would you do that? There are answers to those things. But unless God exists, you can't object to anything morally. You can't say anything is toxic, as the progressive Christians do. You can't say anything is cosmic child abuse, because there's no such thing as child abuse being evil unless there is a standard by which you can judge child abuse as being evil. And if it's not God, it's just your personal opinion. So we unpack all this in the book Stealing from God, and the arguments that the atheists were making 10 years ago are now being picked up, ironically, by so-called progressive Christians. Meanwhile, Richard Dawkins is now starting to say, you know what? There's some good utility in religion. He's not a religious person, obviously. He doesn't believe in Christianity or even God, but he's starting to admit that religion has some benefits for society, particularly the Christian religion. Because he can see over in the UK that a tepid secularism is not going to resist a rabid Islam, a radical Islam. So Richard Dawkins is starting to realize certain things about the utility of religion, the moral utility of religion. And he, of course, said himself that if there is no God, there's no justice, there's no good, there's no evil, there's no right, there's no wrong. Meanwhile, he is criticizing the God of the Bible in the quote I read earlier about God being a unjust, unforgiving control freak, et cetera, right? None of those things can be wrong unless there is a standard by which to judge the God of the Bible. But if the God of the Bible is the true God, then you're using him to argue against him. You're sitting in God's lap to slap his face. And each one of the things you see at the bottom of the screen, at least you did earlier, C.R.I.M.E.S, that's the acronym, stands for a different aspect of reality that atheists, I think, often say point toward atheism, yet none of these things would exist unless God existed. So C stands for causality, R reason, I stands for information, M stands for morality, E for evil, and S for science. In my view, none of those things would exist unless God existed. Now, you see there's seven, we say seven crimes. Well, there's two aspects of I. Not only does I stand for information, it also stands for intentionality, which is something maybe we can talk about later. Obviously, we can't get into it all tonight. We will get into it during the course we're about to start on August 15th.
Frank, go ahead on and tell us a little bit about these individual letters. I'm very familiar with your work as being mentored by you in this last 7-8 years. I've been utilizing your material, the I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist and the Stealing from God material. I've been going to Latin America and doing presentations based on these books and this material. So let's start with the letter C.
Yeah, C stands for causality. And my view and Aristotle's view and Aquinas' view is the fact that causality, cause and effect, presupposes that there's some sort of law out there known as the law of causality. And where do laws come from? They come from lawgivers. I mean, why is the universe so orderly? Why is it so precise? Why does it do the same things over and over again? Why is there such a thing as natural law? Because this universe is set up by a mind and maintained by a mind. And what people misunderstand about Aristotle and Aquinas is they think they're making an argument that God is the first cause of, say, like the Big Bang cause. That's another argument. I think that's a good argument for a being like God. But that's not the argument Aquinas and Aristotle are making. What they're saying is that right now, due to the fact that nature is so orderly and going in a direction, that there has to be a right now cause, that there has to be a mind that's keeping all of this going, that has organized it and keeps it going, that if there are laws out there, there has to be a lawgiver. So Aquinas and Aristotle are talking about a right now cause. And it's ironic that some people who are atheists, in order to avoid the obvious conclusion that there is a God, they're starting to actually doubt the law of causality, that every effect must have a cause. And of course, the problem with that is if you give up on causality, you've given up on all science, because the fundamental rule of all science is that every effect has a cause. In fact, when you're a scientist, what are you trying to do? You're trying to figure out what particular cause caused a particular effect. If you can suggest that effects can come into existence without causes, now you've destroyed all science. And atheists like Lawrence Krauss wrote a book about, Lawrence Krauss wrote that book, A Universe from Nothing, about 10 years ago now, and I respond to it in the book, Stealing from God, because he tries to say that the entire universe could have come into existence out of nothing. And when you analyze what he says, you realize his nothing is not nothing. It's something. It's actually something. It's not nothing. It's not non-being. He talks about a quantum vacuum and the laws of gravity and the laws of quantum mechanics. These are not nothing. They're something. So the question for Lawrence Krauss would be, well, where did the laws of quantum mechanics come from, and the laws of gravity come from, and the quantum vacuum? Where did all that come from? If you're saying the whole universe emerged out of there without a cause, where did the thing that caused those things come from? And so we deal with all that in the book.
Let's go. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say the two more controversial ones right now, especially because other groups like progressive Christianity and New Thought and New Age are pulling these ideas from, secular humanism, and they're trying to build on this bad, faulty logical presupposition and starting points, would be morality and evil. So, for example, progressive Christians will say something like, I cannot believe in the God of the Bible because the God of the Bible is immoral, because he sinned to kill the Canaanites, or let's do one that is central to their arguments, which is because the God of the Bible committed cosmic child abuse by sending his own son to die. So how would you respond to that, and why does this fall in the same morality category that you depict in your work on Stealing from God?
Yeah, good question. Let's deal with the cosmic child abuse charge that the progressive Christians give.
Let's do it.
First of all, Jesus went to the cross voluntarily. He was not coerced. And the only way an infinitely just being can allow unjust creatures like me and you to go unpunished is if he punishes an innocent substitute in our place. It's not an arbitrary claim when Jesus says, I am the only way. He's the only way because there's no way an infinitely just God can allow unjust creatures like me and you to go unpunished. If he does, he's not infinitely just. So what does he do? He adds humanity to his deity. He comes to earth. He allows the creatures that rebelled against him, that would be me and you, to kill him, torture and kill him, so he can then take our punishment on himself. And therefore, then by trusting in him, you're not only forgiven, but you're given his righteousness. This is not arbitrary. This is just philosophically airtight, that if there's an infinitely just being, he can't allow injustice. So what does he do? He punishes an innocent substitute who doesn't have to be punished for his own sin because he's innocent. He punishes him who voluntarily takes the punishment on himself. That is the highest form of love. It reminds me of Michael Monsoor, the United States Navy SEAL, who on September 29, 2006, was standing on a roof in Ramadi, Iraq, and he had two Navy SEALs lying at his feet in the sniper-prone position when a terrorist threw a grenade on the roof. It hit Monsoor in the chest and it fell to his feet. Now, he could have leapt through a doorway behind him to save himself, but instead he dove chest first onto the grenade. It detonated. 30 minutes later, he was dead. But his two teammates received only minor injuries because Mansour's body muffled the blast. He literally sacrificed himself to save his two buddies. Since then, his high school, named in Garden Grove, California, named a new stadium after him, Michael A. Mansour Memorial Stadium, where the SEAL Trident is at the 50-yard line. And the United States Navy commissioned the USS Michael Mansour in January of 2019 in San Diego because he demonstrated the highest form of love, to die for your friends. And what the progressive Christians are saying is that somehow that's immoral. That's not immoral, to die for your friends. In fact, Jesus himself said there's no greater love than the love of someone who dies for his friends. And not only did Jesus die for his friends, he really died for his enemies. He died for all of us because we're all enemies because of our sin. So this is the highest form of love, the highest form of beauty, to voluntarily go to the cross and take our sins from us, and to then therefore be able to forgive us, because the penalty that is due us has now been taken care of. And this is why Paul says in Romans 3:26 that God is just and the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus. He remains just because he punishes sin, but he justifies those of us who are sinners through Christ. So contrary to what the progressive Christians say, this is not cosmic child abuse. This is the highest form of love.
That's beautiful. And before we start our stream, we did pray that we can show how beautiful Jesus is to those who are on the other side, because I know we have a mixed bag of people watching. And I was reading the course page, and one of the things that he focuses on is be able to share the gospel, that you design this course, you design actually this book to respond to the objections and the claims that atheists were making, a few years ago. Now we're seeing similar claims coming from the progressives, from the New Agers, from the nuns. We're seeing a lot of apathy towards the gospel.
Not the NUNs, the NONES.
The NONES, not the NUN.
Gotta watch those crazy nuns out there.
Right, no. But we still have a heart for the lost. I think that's one of the reasons why we exist. At the end of the day, we're not here to win arguments, even though we do want to win arguments to show how Christianity is rational and is the most beautiful thing that you can actually believe in, because it's the truth, and the truth shall set you free. But tell our audience, number one, the ultimate goal for your book and the ultimate goal for turning this book into this educational material that we're going to be showing in a few.
Well, I know that I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist is the most popular book I had a hand in writing, but Stealing from God is my favorite, even though I like the I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist because I wrote it with Dr. Norman Geisler. But the reason I like Stealing from God is taking everything I've learned from Dr. Norman Geisler, particularly the law of non-contradiction, and applying it to so many counter viewpoints in our culture, whether it's atheists, whether it's progressive Christians, whether it's just people who culturally are opposed to Christianity for whatever reason. It's taking all of those claims and pointing out that logically they defeat themselves. That, in fact, I write this in the introduction, Jorge, that the law of non-contradiction shows us with more certainty that atheism is false than that Christianity is true. I'm more certain atheism is false than I'm certain that Christianity is true. Let me put it that way. Okay. And I'm well beyond a reasonable doubt that Christianity is true. Yet atheism logically can't work for a number of reasons I point out in the book. And neither can progressive Christianity. Neither can many left-wing ideas that you see in our culture, because they all presuppose a moral standard that they don't have in their worldview. They're stealing it from God to argue against him. Scientists, you can't do science. Science wouldn't even exist unless this was an orderly universe and you had the ability to reason. Why do we have the ability to reason? Certainly not by just molecules bumping into one another. Why would we believe that molecules bumping into one another would yield true thoughts? Materialism cannot explain reason, but theism can explain reason. Theism can explain why this universe is orderly and why cause and effect is reliable and why we can use these 3-pound brains between our skull here to try and discover what is true in the outside world. And by the way, why is the universe so mathematically precise? Why can you go to a blackboard and write equations on the board and they actually describe what's true out there in the world? And we talk all about this in the book. We'll talk about it in the course. And the course starts August 14th, by the way. If you are watching this after August 14th, you can still join it because our first Zoom session, I think, is the week later. I want to say it's the 23rd of August. The thing about these online courses, you'll watch video, but when you take the premium version, we're going to be together on, I think, 6 occasions to do live Q&A via Zoom. So you're not just watching video, some talking head. You're actually going to watch video, and it's actually before a live audience, and then you're going to be able to ask questions, and we'll learn from one another during those Zoom Q&A sessions.
That's great, Frank. And one of the things that we pride ourselves is that these courses are well put together and that we get to interact with you. So it's not just you taking in all this information and not having the ability to ask questions. You're going to be available, 6 times. Yep. All you have to do is go to crossexamine.org/SFG, stands for Stealing from God, and then you're going to be able to see all the information there. So we have a couple of questions here, and I want to encourage everyone on the other side of the screen to start asking questions related to the topic. There are a lot of questions that are not related to the topic. We're going to try to juggle some of those and answer some of those, but we want to focus and we want to respect the topic of tonight, which is 7 crimes that atheists commit against God. And we said it is the acronym is right there on the screen.
Yeah, and it's all in the book, and it'll all be in the course. We'll go into it in detail there.
So I have a couple of questions here. It says, Brett Taylor says, though they will never admit it, don't most atheists and agnostics not believe in God because it's more than okay, no, this is, guys, again, please, if you're gonna ask questions,
I can see what he's saying. Yeah, they don't want to believe. That's right. Well, look, that may or may not be true. You know, I normally ask people, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? A lot of people will say no. Okay, but an atheist can say, you know, if atheism were true, would you be an atheist? And some Christians would say, no, I'll stay a Christian just because I like it. It's so someone's preference doesn't necessarily tell you whether or not something's true or not. Okay. I mean, when I look at Christianity, I want it to be true. And I really am baffled by people who wouldn't want it to be true. Because when you think about it, if there is a God who created us and has secured eternity for us, despite the fact that we have to go through difficulty here, and we got to go through difficulty here whether we're Christians or not.
Yeah, it's going to come anyways.
Yeah. So why wouldn't you want a God who has secured eternity for you, has forgiven you, and provided his own blood to save you from the evil that you've done? And we've all done evil, whether we're Christians or not. We've all done evil. We know we're fallen. In fact, here's a question you can ask anybody. Doesn't matter what their worldview is. They could be atheist, agnostic, Christian, Buddhist, Hindu, whatever, a Muslim, doesn't matter. You ask the question, what's wrong with the world? Nobody's going to say, nothing, everything's fine.
Nothing is perfect. It's just
going to go, man,
just
there's
peachy.
something wrong.
Right, yeah.
And if there's something wrong, there must be a standard of right out there that we're judging. Well, this is wrong. This isn't working out right. It should be this way. What do you mean it should be?
It's so intuitive. Yeah, it is right in our very being that we know that something is off. And the older you get, the more you suffer, the more you realize that. Because when you're young, you haven't been, you haven't gone through a lot of things. But then when you start hitting 30 and 40 and 50, you realize there is something off here. And a lot of people realize this too, that when you start, and actually I have a couple of questions here, but when you start to read the Bible and you realize how the scriptures describe the reality of men, the heart of men, and how it describes reality the way it is, you start to see that we have the right, like you said, you and Geisler say in I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. We have the right box stop to put things together.
It's the box top to life. You ever try and put a jigsaw puzzle together without the box top? It's really hard.
Yeah.
But if you know the box top, if you can figure out what the truth is, then you can see how different pieces of life that you thought made no sense can fit into life, into the puzzle we call life. And I think Christianity is the box top to the puzzle we call life. That's what we cover in I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. Let's take another question.
Yeah, I got this one. And I'm taking this one, Frank, because it is a hot topic right now. And the question is, do you have any concerns about aliens and how people will react to God when it comes to aliens? Because, I mean, this is something that we need to talk about. Actually, we have a mutual friend from Southern Evangelical Seminary, Dr. Brian Huffling. He's actually doing a lot of work in this area because he is he's doing a lot of research from the military on this topic. But what would you say to Linda? He says, do you have any concern about aliens and how people will react to God when it comes to aliens? Now, I have a couple of thoughts, but let's go ahead and let you touch on that.
First of all, I do believe in UFOs, but the U stands for unidentified. We don't know what they are. That's the whole point, right? And Hugh Ross, who, the great astrophysicist, Christian, he thinks that these may be manifestations of demons. Yeah. And in the Christian worldview, that's certainly possible. I don't know what our friend, the late Michael Heiser, thought, but he had plenty of podcasts that he did on issues like this. You recall what he thought about it?
So Heiser's thoughts were very similar. Actually, he has a whole documentary called Aliens and Demons with Logos Bible software. Also, you can go to Fringe Pop 321. This is one of the channels that he had on YouTube, and he touches on aliens. And bottom line is, he said that these aliens or these beings ultimately seems to manifest very similar characteristics in the way they behave. That a demon or a spiritual being who is able to be in body will behave in this way. So for him, these are not from outer space. Okay, they're from a different dimension, but they are not realm, a different realm. But they're not from the unseen realm. And then the other thing is that people talk about, well, these things have bodies, these things defy gravity, and well, if you're a powerful being that you come from a different dimension, spiritual realm, and you possess this power that is not natural to us humans is going to appear otherworldly, and they are otherworldly, but not from outer space.
Many years ago, Walter Martin, he was the first Bible answer man, and he had a book called Kingdom of the Cults. It's on my shelf back there behind me. And I remember him talking about in that book, people who got engaged in seances, where you try and contact the dead. And he had pretty good eyewitness accounts of what appeared to be the dead person speaking to the person trying to contact them. And he identified it ultimately as demonic activity. And I mean, this is real stuff.
You remember
in America, we don't really believe in the supernatural, right? We're so materialistic. We think this stuff doesn't happen. Yeah. You go to Africa, you go to Haiti, you go to some of these other countries, and this stuff's happening all the time, right?
The time,
demonic activity that's seen, not just unseen, as it happens here.
Yeah, and you remember in the Old Testament, we have great evidence of the witch of Endor bringing Samuel back, and it was not like it was presented as some sort of otherworldly thing. It's all happening in real time here, but from another dimension. I do want to say so.
It's interesting too that the director of The Exorcist died today. That movie that came out 50 years ago that freaked a lot of people out. Well, you've actually had some contact with the Roman Catholic.
Right, Carlos Martins.
The top exorcist out there. And you go to that guy, and you talk to him about some of the stuff he's seen, this is not normal cause and effect inside the universe stuff.
Right.
Right. And in fact, so many people will believe in the demonic, and yet they won't believe in God. It strikes me as quite odd, because there's no such thing as evil unless there's good, and there's no such thing as good unless God existed. So, but anyway, go.
One of the things that Heiser used to say is if this was one of those experiences, that you phrased it very similarly, if one of those experiences is true, then the naturalistic framework is completely blown, right?
Yeah, think about this. No, let me piggyback what you said, because that's an important point. The reason I said earlier, one of the reasons I said earlier, I'm more certain that atheism's false than Christianity's true, because if just one spiritual experience in the history of the world is true, naturalism, atheism's false. Just one in the entire history of the world. Yeah. Naturalism, materialism's false. Doesn't mean Christianity's true.
True, yeah.
I think there's evidence Christianity is true, but not just because naturalism's false.
Hey, I was going to say this because I saw one of those questions come up earlier, and the guy say, okay, atheists commit crimes against God. And the question was, which God? So, Frank, if atheists are committing crimes against God, how do you get to the God of the Bible?
Well, that's what we do in the second to last chapter in Stealing from God, and we'll cover it in the online course too. Go to crossexamine.org, click on online courses. You'll see it there. Go to crossexamine.org/SFG. We talk about the 4 major questions we need to answer, and this is a summary of the I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist book. We need to answer, does truth exist? Does God exist? Are miracles possible? And is the New Testament telling us the truth about particularly the resurrection? If those 4 things are answered yes, that truth exists, that God exists, that miracles are possible, and Jesus rose from the dead, then Christianity's true. Jesus is teaching us the truth about who the true God was. He's the second person of the eternal Trinity, right? So we can show that Christianity is indeed true, and he is the standard of righteousness that's written on our heart, and any deviation from that standard would be what we would call evil. And yet people can recognize evil everywhere, Jorge. That's what they're all doing when they're complaining that God is evil in the Old Testament, or God is evil because he doesn't support LGBTQ, or he doesn't support, or he kills Canaanites, or he seems to support slavery. We deal with all that in the book. We can't deal with it all now. Maybe we can get to a question on it. But the true God, I think, is the God of the Bible. Now, could I be wrong? Of course I could be wrong. Look at the evidence and decide for yourself.
Right, and that's what we try to do here. We get accused of being Bible thumpers or trying to push Christianity down people's throats, and what we want to do is to teach you how to be critical thinkers. That's all. At the end of the day, we're all responsible for our actions. And actually, this is another point that you bring up in the book, is that if God doesn't exist, there is no such thing as free will. Right. If actually you said it earlier, if atheism is true, then there is no such thing as science, because everything is predetermined and there is no cause and effect, which is the foundation of the scientific method.
That's right.
Trying to find out what are the causes for things. Right. I have a great question here, Frank, and I want to touch on it because I think it will be very good for a lot of people on the other side. And it is when a new challenge comes along, things like aliens, we just touched on that, the trans movement or BLM and so on. What steps do you take to begin to answer these topics? How do you research or build a defense? That's very important, especially for people nowadays that are bombarded with these crazy ideas coming from every direction. Frank, how do you find yourself building up answers? And again, I have an idea, but you're the expert here. I want you to share with the audience.
Well, that was a question from Dan, I think, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, Dan, it's a good question. I go back to the principles in this book, Stealing from God, to evaluate the ideas that are being stated against themselves, because I think so often the people that are putting forth these new ideas are stealing a standard from God or somehow violating the law of non-contradiction to try and support what they're trying to do. Let's take the trans movement, or the whole LGBTQ movement, by the way. They are claiming they have certain rights, but where do rights come from? Rights don't come from people. Rights don't come from governments. A right is something you have regardless of what your government says about it. A right is something you possess regardless of what somebody else says about it. A right is universal. A right is something that can only come from God. This is why our Declaration of Independence says we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men were created and endowed by their government. No, endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. If God doesn't exist, there aren't rights to anything. So when someone comes out and says, I've got a right to same-sex marriage, or I have a right to an abortion, or I have a right to have you pay for my transgender surgery, I have a right to this or to that, or universal health care, whatever it is, time out. Where are you getting rights from? Rights can only come from God. Maybe you're right. Maybe you have a case. Okay, make the case. The problem is, in today's culture, and particularly in today's school system, we don't teach kids how to think. We teach them what to feel. We don't teach logic. If we taught logic, the public school system and the products of the public school system would be a lot better. By the way, that's why we're about to teach a course in logic. Sandra Fulbright's going to lead that. It begins in October. It's called Train Your Brain. It's actually a course for beginners in logic. So it's really written for 6th to 8th graders, and only they can take the premium version, but anybody can take the self-paced course. If you've never had a course in logic, take Train Your Brain. It's written for 6th to 8th graders, so even I can understand it. And I helped Shanda with that course, but she's the main instructor. So Dan, what I always do is I try and look at the logical underpinnings, the rational underpinnings of what people are saying, and then see if there's any flaw in it. See if they are even living up to their own standards, because some people will say we're all about inclusion, tolerance, and diversity. But if you disagree with them, whatever happened to inclusion, tolerance, and diversity? I've noticed that when I've expressed a view that is a diverse view, different from theirs, they don't include me and they don't tolerate me. So the people who are claiming they're fighting for inclusion, tolerance, and diversity are often the most non-tolerant or intolerant, non-diverse, exclusionary people you'll ever meet. This is where cancel culture comes from. You don't agree with them, they're going to shut you down, cancel you. So I try and look at the logic behind what people are trying to say. The problem is, quite frequently, there's not logic behind it. It's just all emotion.
That's true, man. And right now, I have a 15 and a 16-year-old, and it's so difficult because they really don't care much about reason. They are all in their feelings because that's what culture is teaching them. I have Jessica Nash O'Hare from Facebook has a great question. It says, what do you think is the most common thing that is stolen from God? Obviously in the framework or the vein of what we discussed in here, which is the Stealing from God online course that we're going to be showing on the screen, just a few. But it says, what do you think is the most common thing that is stolen from God, but is portrayed as not from God? In other words, and I will say my bet, if I were to guess, it would be morality. Yeah, morality is the main thing that people, not only atheists but also progressives, people from the left, humanists, etc. They say God is immoral. You should behave a certain way, and yet there is no foundational starting point for any of these moral judgments.
Right. Hey, but let's be honest. There are things in the Bible that at face value look crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, come on. Richard Dawkins, when he did, I read that quote earlier. I mean, he wasn't making that up. It does appear that, why does God want to kill the Canaanites? And is God really supporting slavery? And, I mean, those are, and why?
And those are good questions now. This is one of the things we do want. We don't, and one thing that we always put forward here is we are not trying to protect people from their Bibles. We're not trying to hide the things that are in the Bible. What we're trying to do is to help you think through those things.
That's right. And if you're going to say anything is immoral, you have to have a standard of morality that you're judging something as being immoral. Where are you getting that standard from? You say, well, it's self-evident. It's written on my heart. Who wrote it there? And why is it there? Who is the standard beyond that standard written on your heart? It can only be from God. Now, maybe it's possible the Christian God isn't the true God, and there's another God out there that is the standard. In that case, the God of the Bible would be immoral if he disagreed with the God, the true God. The problem is, I think when you look at the evidence, it turns out that the true God is the God of the Bible. So morality is a big one, but let me mention one other. In fact, when people say, what are the top 3 reasons people stay away from Christianity? It's morality, morality, and morality. Okay, but I think atheists have made a big deal of reason. That's the R in crimes. They think they're the reasonable ones.
Yeah.
That it's
I remember
crazy...
there was a movement. I saw a meme the other day that says this didn't age well. They were called the Brights.
The Brights.
The Brights.
Yeah. That's what Daniel Dennett, they named themselves the Brights, okay? In any event,
man. just I remember the meme. It was hilarious. But anyways, go ahead.
Yeah, but I'm not bright. I'm from New Jersey. Okay, but I have to study things and try and make them understandable to myself for people to know what I'm trying to say. But sometimes you run across something from like C.S. Lewis, and you go, I can't say that any better than C.S. Lewis. Let me just show you what C.S. Lewis said about people who think atheism's true and are materialists. That's what most atheists are today. They think all that exists are just molecules in motion. You're just a molecular machine. You're a sack of chemicals. You're just a moist robot because every thought you have is the result of the laws of physics. You're not really reasoning. You're just reacting. And here's what Lewis said 80 years ago about this, 78 years ago when he was writing Mere Christianity, or 80 years ago. Check this out. I can't say it any better. He said, suppose there were no intelligence behind the universe. In that case, nobody designed my brain for the purpose of thinking. Thought is merely the byproduct of some atoms within my skull. But if so, how can I trust my own thinking to be true? But if I can't trust my own thinking, of course, I can't trust the arguments leading to atheism and therefore have no reason to be an atheist or anything else. Unless I believe in God, I can't believe in thought, so I can never use thought to disbelieve in God. Boom. You can't say it any better than that. You're assuming, you're using a mind that is better explained by God than by molecules in motion in order to say there is no God. You have to steal from God to argue against him. And John Lennox, our mutual friend, has put it this way. He's had conversations with other scientific people who are atheists, and he'll say to them, hey, how do you do science? And they start to show some sort of thing in their lab. He goes, no, I don't mean how you do science out here. How do you do science up here? He points to his head, right? And they go, you mean with my mind? They start to say mind, and they catch themselves. And they go, no,
they cannot bring themselves to say brain, to say mind, right? Yeah.
So then he says, tell me how your brain got to where it is now. And so usually they'll say something like, well, my brain is the product of blind natural forces that didn't have its end in mind. And then Lennox says, and you trust it? I mean, why would you trust any organ put together by natural law that didn't have its end in mind without any intelligence? Why would you trust it? But you can trust it. Why can you trust it? Because it was put together by a mind, a great mind that didn't have a beginning, a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, first cause mind. If that mind didn't exist, your mind wouldn't exist. So you can't use your mind to say the first cause mind didn't exist. And this is what Lewis is pointing out. I mean, Lennox says, if somehow a tornado raged through a junkyard and put together what looked like a computer, would you trust anything that the computer told you? Or I think Fred Hoyle came up with this, who was an atheist years ago. He said, if a tornado raged through a junkyard and somehow put together a Boeing 747, would you get on it and fly it? No, you'd be like, this thing isn't right. It's got to be put together by a mind for you to trust it. And your mind is the same way. And that's what we cover in the Reason chapter. And we'll cover in the Stealing from God online course.
So I'm going to show people where they can go and find this course real quick, Frank. All you got to do is go to crossexamine.org. There is a tab over there that says courses, or you can get to this landing page directly by going to crossexamine.org/course. Now we have limited seating. We're going to be going over the book, The Frank Road, and all the videos that were created in high quality for you. And Frank, you're going to be with the audience, everybody who signed up with the students of this course, 6 times live in conversation in the classroom, virtual classroom, that is, but in a classroom, so they can ask questions like the following. Charles from YouTube asks, how do we reach and engage the youth with topics like this that are so important and deep, but their attention spans are so small and interests are even smaller? And this is one of the things that I struggle with. So I want to hear your answer too, Frank.
Well, that's kind of what you've been able to do on our YouTube channel, Jorge, is take the shortest little clips we can come up with, put them up on our YouTube channel, so you don't have to have a long attention span to get the point. And these are largely Q&As from the college campus. So when we go to a college campus, we've got several lined up for the fall. You can go to our website, crossexamined.org, and see where we're going to be. I know we're going to be at Auburn. I know we're going to be at Ohio State. I know we're going to be at Florida Atlantic. We're going to be at several other places this fall. But when we do the full seminar and we have time for questions, we always have at least 45 minutes, an hour for questions, sometimes more. We take those questions and we cut them up into, just the Q&A, and we put that up on our YouTube channel. And there's more than 1,700 videos on our YouTube channel. Yeah. Most of them are these short Q&As. So if you can keep things short, you can get people engaged. Look, it's a universal problem. Here's the problem. Look, this is the problem. We all know this is the problem. Yeah. Right? Not my wife, but but the iPhone, right? It's a blessing and a curse, isn't it? Right? Yeah. It's a blessing. You get a lot of great info, but it's also a curse. You get a lot of bad info, and it makes your attention span really short. So we try and reach people here so we can compete with the other ideas that they're being bombarded with.
And I think creating engaging content is very important. Like you said, keep the attention by adding overlays, cuts. And if you are in a Sunday school setting or youth group, or even at your own house, today I took my son to work out. We sat and did a short Bible study, no more than 20, 30 minutes. Mm-hmm. And it was one of those fill in the blank, asking questions type things, because they lose interest fairly quickly. They're not interested to begin with, right? But if you get them engaged for, 10, 15, 20 minutes, people love to hear themselves talk. So actually asking questions is a very good way to, asking questions is a very good way.
Spot the lie, spot the lie. That's where you're watching something. Say, watch something on TV and it's a lie. You say, hey, you turn to your kid. Hey, what's the lie here? And just let the kid talk. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Have a conversation when you go through life. And you don't have to break out the Bible all the time. You can just have conversations in between the time you do your Bible studies to say, hey, what about this? What about that?
And this is one of the beautiful things, is that since everything in the Bible corresponds to reality, right? If we teach in truth to our children, it's going to line up with the scriptures. And whenever they are seeking for answers and they know that what you'll be saying is the truth and it lines up with the scriptures, they're going to go to the scriptures to find those answers. And one of the best ways to look at the verse, it says, train up a child in the way they should go, and he will never depart from it, is look at it the other way around. Is train up a child in the way that he should go, in the way will never depart from it. Because if he deviates from this, remember, this is a proverb, right? It's not a promise.
It's not a promise.
Right.
Not a promise.
So if your child deviate from it, he knows the way back. So that then you tie that thought with the prodigal son. He knew how to get back to his father's place. Yep. And the interesting thing is that 9 times out of 10, we don't realize that the ones who are really gone are the ones at home that they think that they are entitled and they earn their way to heaven. So that's another thing that we have to be mindful of. So Cyan Collins from Facebook, on your Facebook page, asked the question that has to do with reason. And I want to ask it to you because it's related to the course. It says, what evidence do you have that this God can help anyone be perfectly sinless without taking away their free will? And this is I know that you have a well thought out answer for that, because this is one of the questions that come up over and over again.
Is this a predestination free will question?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, we deal with that all the time. And in fact, we had Leighton Flowers on the podcast maybe 6 months ago. People ought to go back and listen to that because Leighton's really good at his Soteriology 101 YouTube channel. He deals with this all the time. But the idea that because God knows all things, that we don't have free will is a non sequitur. It doesn't follow. I mean, I know tomorrow that the sun's going to rise in the east, but I'm not causing it to rise in the east. Just because you know what's going to happen doesn't mean you're causing it. Just because you know that Jorge is going to be on this podcast, just because God knew it from all eternity, doesn't mean he's causing it to happen in the sense that he's overpowering Jorge's free will to be here, right? God, since he knows all things, it's unavoidable. When he elects to create a universe, he knows the outcome. But that doesn't mean he's causing it. That doesn't mean we don't have free will. When a mother puts down her child at night to go to bed, her newborn, she knows at some point during the night that baby's going to wake up and want to eat. But she's not causing the baby to wake up and eat just because she knows it's going to happen. And so God knows what we're going to do, but he knows what we're freely going to do. He's not causing us to do what we do. So God can elect us in a certain sense, but still give us free will. In fact, I think God is so sovereign that he can get his will done through our free will.
Right.
And my co-author, Dr. Norman Geisler, wrote a book on this many years ago. This is the book to get if you really want to get into it.
Chosen but free.
Yeah, you're chosen but free. If you really want to get into this, you can also go to Soteriology 101. You could also check out my interview with Leighton Flowers, and you can go back into the Cross-Examined app archive, go to 2018, and listen to the August 2018 Predestination Free Will podcast I did, because I go through Romans 9 and all that stuff about hardening the heart and all that. So check all that out if you're really interested in that topic.
Question. What do you think an atheist is? There are no atheists without people claiming there is a God. They don't need a God. They only need people like you to claim there is a God in order to be atheist. So how would you answer that claim, Frank?
Well, lately atheists have been saying they lack a belief in God, which here's the odd thing about that. If they're saying they lack a belief in God, they're really not saying anything about God. What they're saying is something about their psychology.
Right.
They're not saying anything about whether or not God really exists. They're just saying,
external world. Yeah.
I lack a belief. Well, so what? I mean,
Yeah.
This cup lacks a belief in God. We don't call it an atheist. But actually, there's an easier way of getting right to the point on this. When somebody says, I just lack a belief in God, you just got to ask a couple questions. Here are the questions. Or really just one question. The question is this. Here's the premise or the claim. Does God exist? Question. Do you agree with that? Do you disagree with that? Or do you not know? If you agree with it, you're a theist. If you disagree with it, you're an atheist. If you don't know, you're an agnostic.
Yeah.
Those are the three categories.
Yeah.
Stop all this nonsense talk about lacking a belief in God, right?
Yeah.
In fact, if I lack a belief in materialism,
I lack a belief that I'm overweight, but I go to the scale and I see that 220, baby, and I'm like, well, you just made me a believer. Yeah, that doesn't say anything about reality. It says something about your state of mind.
When you go to the scale, a little card comes out and says, one at a time. All right, we'll be here all week, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay, it's the joke time. All right, come on. Let's see what else we have here.
All right.
I just pulled one up. It was really, really good. It said, question. I have two, so he puts them in MVK Delta. He puts them in order. He says, number one, Big Bang only explains the expansion, not the beginning. And then he asks, how would you reply to such a claim? And number two, how you respond to the hiddenness of God argument.
Okay, first one about the Big Bang. The evidence shows that space-time and matter had a beginning, that it wasn't the expansion of a pre-existing pellet. It was actually the creation event out of non-being, out of nothing, no
Right.
space, no matter, no time. And even agnostic astronomers, even Stephen Hawking admitted this, who was an atheist. He said almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. So it's not just about the expansion, it's about the creation point. It was Paul Davies out there at Arizona State University, who's an agnostic, saying, look, we're talking about the creation of space, time, and matter out of nothing. We're not talking about the expansion of some dense pellet. In fact, the definition of a singularity is a point of infinite density. Now, a point of infinite density means that essentially space, time, and matter have gone to zero. So it's nothing. It's non-being. That's where the universe came from. And my point, and not just my point, but other people that look into this, like Dr. William Lane Craig, if space, time, and matter had a beginning, it would seem to me and to him that whatever created space, time, and matter must transcend space, time, and matter. In other words, the cause must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful to create the universe out of nothing, personal in order to choose to create, and also intelligent to have a mind to choose to create. And I always ask audiences, when you think about a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent cause, who do you think of? You say God. Well, how do you know it's the Christian God? And the answer is we don't. Yet, you don't get all the way to Jesus or the God of the Bible just from the cosmological argument, just from the Big Bang. What you get is a being that could be the God of the Bible. You've got to see if Jesus rose from the dead to discover whether or not the God that created the universe or the being that created the universe is Allah, Jesus, or somebody else. And I think when you realize that Jesus rose from the dead, then you can say that the same being that walked out of the tomb 1,990 years ago is the same being in whose divine nature created the universe out of nothing. So that's the answer, the short answer to the first question about the Big Bang. It was the creation of space, matter, and time, not just the expansion rate of say, a dense pellet. And then the hiddenness of God, there's many ways of looking at the hiddenness of God. One was put forth by Soren Kierkegaard, which I think was quite interesting. Soren Kierkegaard said, imagine, and he was a Danish Christian, but fideist. He didn't think you could get evidence for God. He just believed. He just had faith. Anyway, Kierkegaard gave a thought experiment where he said, imagine a prince, a prince who isn't married yet, sees a beautiful young peasant woman in his jurisdiction, and he immediately falls in love with her and he wants to marry her. So he goes to his father, the king, and he says, King, I think I met my future wife. She's a peasant out here in the field. What should I do? And the father says, well, if you go to her as the prince, she may come to you and be your wife, but not really love you. She just might acquiesce to your power. She just might acquiesce to your position. You can't go to her as the prince. The only way you could go to her is as a peer and win her as a peer. Then you'll know, and she'll know that she truly loved you and didn't just acquiesce to your power. So what you need to do, son, is if you really love her, you need to renounce the crown. You need to become a peasant and go into the village and win her as a peer. So that's what he did. He renounced the crown. He went into the village as a peasant because that's what he was now, and he won her as a peer. And that's what God does for us. He comes to earth not with all sorts of power in his first coming. He comes to earth as a lamb to the slaughter, and he wins. He comes to us as a peer, and he tries to win us as a peer by sacrificing himself in the greatest form of love that anyone could exhibit. So he doesn't overpower us. As C.S. Lewis famously said, God cannot ravish, he can only woo. If he makes his presence too overpowering, then we couldn't really go our own way. But if he gives us enough evidence, so if we want to believe in him, we can, but leaves enough ambiguity and enough hidden so we can go our own way, then we truly have free will. And so I think God gives us enough evidence to know that he exists and that Jesus is the Savior, but he also gives us enough freedom, enough room, so we can go our own way if we want to. We truly have free will. And love requires us to have freedom. Yeah. If you're going to freely, you can't force somebody to love you. You've got to allow them to freely do so.
Absolutely. Great.
And by the way, this is all in the book, Stealing from God. So
right. So that, and again, we're talking about 7 crimes atheists commit against God. That is part of the main thesis of the Stealing from God book. And the book is the central piece of the Stealing from God online course that we're going to be showing you on the screen in just a minute.
The 10 hours of video too.
Right,
There's 10
so
hours of
10
video
hours
before a
of
live
video,
audience. Yeah.
6 hours of one-on-one with Frank in a classroom setting, all virtual. All you have to do is go to crossexamine.org/SFG, stands from Stealing from God, and you will be able to see all the information there. I have a great question here from Singapore. He says, in a place like Singapore where most people believe there's a God, but we are so multiracial, multi-religious, how do you start to talk about Jesus to them? Answer that question based on the framework of the Stealing from God course, Frank.
Yeah, I would start asking questions like, you believe in God. Who is God? And why do you think that God exists? You know, sometimes people will say to me, I don't believe in God. And then I'll ask them, what kind of God don't you believe in? And they tell me the attributes of this God. And I go, yeah, I don't believe in that kind of God either. Right. In fact, in the intro of Stealing from God, we have a whole section and we say, you know, a lot of people have different conceptions of God. And I want you for a minute just to take the word God out of your vocabulary for a minute. And I just want you to think about this. Who is the source and sustainer of all things? Who is the source and sustainer of all things? And then we talk about the attributes of this source and sustainer. You know, spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, just, intelligent, omniscient, you know, all of these qualities. And when you really think about that being, that's really who the true God is. In fact, it's been put this way. If you think about, say, any of those attributes, and then you remove all limits from your mind, that's God. And of course, the Bible says the heavens declare the glory of God. And when we look to the heavens, what do we see? Well, we see, you know how many stars there are in the universe? And again, we cover this in the book too. The number of stars in the universe are about equivalent to the number of grains of sand on all the beaches on all the earth times 100,000. And just in our galaxy, to go between two stars in our galaxy, if you could go space shuttle speed, 5 miles per second, 18,000 miles an hour or so, it would take you over 200,000 years just to go from our star, the sun, to another star an average distance away inside our galaxy. And the number of stars in the whole universe are equivalent to the number of sand grains on 100,000 Earths. Now, if that's to communicate the infinity of God, it does a pretty good job. That's who the source and sustainer of all things is. And if one attribute is infinite of God, all attributes are, which means his justice is infinite, which means you and I are in trouble because we've been unjust. But thankfully, his love is also infinite. That's why he sends himself to take our punishment on himself, because he's infinitely just and infinitely loving. So
I got Connor has a question and Keek has another question. So because Keek did a super chat, I'm going to actually ask her question right now. And she says, do you think people who watch scary movies or videos are opening themselves up to demonic influence, oppression, or possession?
Just watching scary movies?
Yeah, people who watch scary movies or videos. I've heard this a lot. And actually, I've heard this a lot mainly from within the Christian community on the more charismatic side. That says that these things like scary movies are an opening to the demonic because, you know, the eyes are the windows to the soul. Right. Yeah. And that is sort of the way that these entities kind of get in. It's like you're letting them in.
Well, first of all, I don't like anything scary. That's why I don't even look in the mirror, much less scary movies. All right. But I don't know the answer to that question because it seems like watching that, like, okay, when you watched, how many saw the movie Nefarious? Did you see the movie Nefarious?
Yeah,
anybody? If not, you ought to go see it. Put together by my friend Steve Dace about demonic activity. And I don't think watching that opens you up to demonic activity. I think it actually informs you about demonic activity. Because you know that Steve Dace put in that movie, you guys got to see the movie, because the convict is demonically possessed, and he's like, seems to be going in and out of character. There's a demon that keeps taking over the convict in the movie. And Jack Hibbs,
and actually, we just said something about Carlos Martin, that was actually one of the guys that was a consultant for the script of the video.
Oh, was he? All right.
Yeah.
Well, Jack Hibbs, the pastor out there in Calvary Chapel, Chino Hills, a friend of mine, says about 30 years ago, he actually had that same experience with a guy who was demon possessed, who was going in like, the guy had multiple personalities, had come in and he just said that he just murdered somebody. And this, I mean, it was really weird stuff. And so Jack, when he saw the movie, he's going, that happened to me. There was a guy who was doing just that.
Yeah.
So do I think you're opening yourself up to watch that? Certainly not nefarious, because it was telling the truth. I don't know about these movies that are not. I mean, if you're a Christian and you're inhabited by the Holy Spirit, you can't be demonically possessed. But that doesn't mean that you ought to dabble in any of this. Certainly you can't dabble in the occult. Certainly you can't dabble. I mean, trying to do it, you can't. There's real power there.
Yeah.
It's demonic power.
Yeah.
In fact, Melissa Doherty, we're going to have her on the podcast. She's going to talk a little bit about that. And for those of you, I forgot to mention this, you guys need to watch, if you've got kids who are deconstructing right now, you need to watch or listen to this week's podcast with Natasha Crane and Elisa Childers, because we talked about some of the things you can do. If your kid is deconstructing, listen to the current podcast on the I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist podcast, because we cover all that.
Yeah, I want to make a comment about this. So, I don't know how far to take it when it comes to opening yourself for possession. I will say definitely oppression, because if you're a new Christian, if you are easily influenced by these things, you're going to be oppressed in the sense that you're going to be fearful, right? And true love casts out fear. God is a God of love, and you should be filling yourself up with the word and not with these kind of things. When it comes to a demonic influence, in a sense that it's the same thing with video games, right? Is the demonic influence to play Grand Theft Auto? Well, it depends on how mature you are and how you're into the game and how you're into all of these other things. So I think that scary movies and videos are not the main thing you should be afraid of to opening yourself to all of this. I think is movies with bad ideas, not the ones who are portraying. And our friend Richard House says it all the time. He studied for years the occult, and he says the occult is occult for a reason. That's why it's not overt, right? It's occult. Yeah. And then quiet. The other thing is
seductive.
Yeah, it's seductive.
Come as an angel of light. Yeah.
Right. And the other thing is there are other movies that are worse than scary movies, and those are the movies that are presenting you a false view of reality and that are selling it to you subtly as if that's what you should believe. So those are the things that have demonic influence. Those are the things that have demonic oppression. And those are the things that can possess your thoughts, your value system, and then you end up far away from God. So it's not much the scary movies, but all the other crap that you're letting in that is actually shaping your mind and shaping your thoughts.
But the worst are the scary movies with all that other crap.
Right. That's even worse, because that is like two-layer cake right there. Absolutely. Right. Let's see what else. Oh, the other question.
Do a couple more.
Yeah. The other question is, and this is a very good point to kind of circle back around on the C.R.I.M.E.S acronym. So it was, what are the 7 crimes? So we talk about the I being 2. So we have C.R.I.M.E.S. And then we have intentionality and we have information on the I. So go ahead on and give us a quick summary. And as you're doing that, I'm going to try to bring in the screen so people can see where they can go sign up for the course.
Yeah, causality, the C, reason, the R, I, information and intentionality. By the way, information deals with what you might find in a cell. DNA is a genetic code. It's got 4 letters and it goes in a code-like manner. It's basically a software program. And where I come from, programs always come from programmers. Codes always come from coders. Messages always come from minds. And in every cell in your body, all 40 trillion or so of them, you have a message that is, how many? 300, I want to say. 3.5 billion letters long. 3.5 billion letters long. That appears to come from a mind. In all our prior experience, messages always come from mind. So just in the cell itself, the message that is written in DNA is seems to require an intelligence. I mean, if you're walking along the beach and you see John loves Mary written in the sand, you don't go, the waves did that, or crabs came out of the water and made that message. Yeah. You go, oh no, that must be from a mind. Well, if John loves Mary requires a mind, how about a message 3.5 billion letters long? All the letters are in the right order. So it is a code. And even Richard Dawkins has admitted this, that this is a digital code. It's in the same form as a digital code. And codes come from coders. Programs come from programmers. Messages come from mind. So that's one of the I's in information. The other I is intentionality, that things are going in a direction. So there must be some kind of mind out there keeping them going. And then, of course, M stands for morality, E for science, E for evil, S for science. And then we have a chapter in there about why the New Testament appears to be true, or why the whole Bible appears to be true. And then we have a concluding chapter which wraps it all together. And we'll cover all this in the course, the Stealing from God course. And if you want to be a part of the premium version, sign up soon.
Starts the course in 6 days.
Yep. And the course starts August 16th or August 14th. But if you're watching this after it, you may still be able to get in because our first Zoom is the following week.
That's correct.
So
to wrap it up, well, maybe we have, it's always happened. We always have a terrific question right at the end that we have to make sure that we have to answer. But I have James ask from YouTube. He said, I have noticed that in my chaplaincy, some people get upset when I counter the crimes objection with apologetics. What advice would you give me to help an apologist not become upset with, become upset with them? So he's an apologist.
Who becomes upset?
He's an apologist. He says, I have noticed in my chaplaincy, some people get upset when I counter the crimes objection with apologetics. What advice would you give to help? Okay, he's an apologist. What advice would you give him not to become upset with them? That's the way it was written.
Yeah, I don't know why you'd get upset. Why do you think everyone should agree with you? Right? I mean, when I was 20, I didn't agree with myself now. When I was 21, I didn't agree with my 61-year-old self. So why should you expect everybody to agree with you? You shouldn't. Try and figure out why the guy believes what he believes. Ask a bunch of questions. Get Greg Koukos' book, Tactics, and ask, what do you mean by that? How'd you come to that conclusion? Why do you think that's true? What evidence do you have for that position? Right? Before somebody's going to accept your worldview, they got to begin to doubt their own worldview first. So ask them some questions to see if they can support their own worldview. And once they realize they can't, then they might be open to at least considering evidence for your worldview. So, that's what I would do. I would just ask a bunch of questions. There's no reason to get upset. And always ask, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? And most of the time, I've noticed that people will say no. So why even wasting your time with evidence? Because they're not open to evidence. You might plant a seed here or there, but keep barraging them with evidence when they're going, I don't want evidence. I want to do my own thing. I'm not on a truth quest. I'm on a happiness quest. I want to go my own way. I want to keep my autonomy. I don't want there to be a God. I want to be God of my own life. Most people are looking for God like a criminal's looking for a cop. They're not interested. They want to go their own way. Remember, we said the 3 greatest objections to Christianity are morality, morality, and morality. They don't want to try and live under God's rules. They want to do their own thing. So Maybe someday they'll change their mind. But getting mad at them ain't going to help. Right?
Let me go ahead on and kick another can of worms here. So we talk about evil. We talk about morality. We actually said throughout the stream that that's probably one of the main crimes that is committed against God. People claim objective morality. They claim that Christians are doing evil things, so people are doing evil things. They don't have a way to anchor that. But they talk about rights. They talk about the right to kill your baby.
Hang on a sec. Marilyn has a question here.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
We already talked about rights. She's saying my 16-year-old grandson is convinced that God is the most narcissistic demonstration. What does it say?
Let me
Most
see.
narcissistic demonstration there is defining narcissism. I will never bow to anyone, especially a narcissist. I need help. Okay.
Whoa.
We had this question at Fresno State like 13 years ago. This kid got up to the microphone and said, God's a jealous God, and that's unbecoming. And so I asked him, I said, are you married? He said, no. I said, well, one day when you are married, would it be right for you to be jealous if your wife decided to date somebody else? And he reluctantly agreed. Yeah. Why? There'd be something wrong with you if you weren't jealous. If somebody belonged to you and they were betraying you and they were going down a road you knew would be harmful to them and to you, there would be something wrong with you if you didn't care. There'd be something wrong with you if you weren't jealous over that. Jealousy is a good thing from God because God knows what's best for us is if we put our trust in him and follow him. Once we get distracted by going in our own direction, it's not going to wind up well for us. And so God is jealous. That's a good thing. If he wasn't jealous for what he owns, what he created, and what he wants the best for, he wouldn't be a loving God. And so when the 16-year-old grandson says God is a narcissist, you need to point out he's not a narcissist. He's looking out for you because he knows what's best for you is to follow him. And by the way, God does not need your praise. I know this is going to sound odd, but you can't improve God by worshiping him. And by the way, you can't hurt God by cursing him. Who gets the benefit of praise when we worship God? We do. Who gets the detriment when we curse God? We get it. So you're not affecting God by loving him, and you're not demoting or degrading God by hating him. You're the one that's either getting the benefit or the detriment of those things. And that's why God is jealous, because he loves us. He wants you and us to put our trust and follow him because he knows what's best for us, and that's him.
All right.
So
I think no more questions are needed. Frank, tell people where they can find this course and how they can have access to you for full 6 hours of live.
Yeah, it'll probably be longer than 6 hours.
Yeah. But I'm
it
saying
always goes longer than an hour, just like this thing went longer than an hour because we're dealing with questions. Yeah, go to crossexamine.org. Click on online courses. You'll see it there. Or type in crossexamine.org as Jorge here's at the bottom of the screen, /SFG. Sign up for the premium version so you can be in these Q&A sessions.
When it
live
starts?
Q&A sessions via Zoom.
It's August, 16, 14?
It starts the 14th. It starts
14th.
a week from today, but the first Zoom session isn't until, I think, the 23rd or something. So if you want to be a part, sign up soon, a part of it, because we take a limited number of people. We want to give everybody a chance to ask questions, so we don't want too many people in the class.
Right. We want to be intimate. So thank you to all the 500 people on the other side of the screen that are watching. Thank you, everybody on YouTube. Thank you, everybody on Facebook, both of our pages. Everybody who are watching through the app, through the website. God bless you, and we'll see you here next time.